The rancher was powerless in the water, and the Apache woman kept her eyes on him. The sun had just climbed high in the sky, spilling its golden light across the wide-open fields of Arizona. Dust rose slowly from the dry ground with every gentle breeze. In the distance, the rancher could see his cattle grazing, scattered across the plains like tiny brown dots. It had been a long, hot summer, and the land had grown thirsty. The air shimmered with heat, and even the trees seemed to lean under the weight of the sun. The rancher, a man used to hard work and early mornings, wiped the sweat from his brow and sighed. The work never seemed to end, and yet he loved it. The smell of the earth, the sound of cattle lowing, the endless horizon that stretched farther than the eye could see. But today, he felt unusually tired. The sun burned hotter than usual, and even moving a bucket of water from the well to the barn felt heavier than before. He longed for a break, for the coolness of water that could wash away the sweat and dust that clung to him. His eyes turned to the small river that cut through the land a few miles away. The river was not wide, but it had always been a source of life on the ranch. Its water was clear, reflecting the blue of the sky, and he remembered how, as a boy, he had spent hours wading in its gentle currents. The rancher made up his mind. He would go to the river just for a little while to feel the cool water on his skin and take a moment to rest. He left his boots by the edge of the barn and walked toward the river, feeling the crunch of dry soil under his feet. With each step, the heat of the sun pressed down on him, but the thought of the river ahead gave him hope. As he neared the water, he noticed that the usual quiet of the riverbank was even more serene than he remembered. The only sounds were the soft ripple of water over rocks and the distant call of a bird overhead. The rancher smiled to himself. This would be the perfect escape, a place to forget the troubles of ranch life, even if just for a little while. He stepped carefully into the river, feeling the coolness immediately. It was a relief, a welcome shock to his tired body. For a moment he closed his eyes and let the water wash over him. The current was gentle and the river seemed calm, but as he walked further, he misjudged the depth. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, and suddenly the water rose faster than he expected. Panic flickered across his mind. He tried to step back, but the current pushed against him. He stumbled and sank slightly deeper, realizing that this was no longer a simple wade in the river. From the riverbank, a pair of eyes watched him carefully. An Apache woman had been traveling along the river that morning, moving quietly and skillfully through the trees and rocks near the water. She had grown up with the land, knowing how to read the signs of nature, which plants were safe, where the water ran fastest, which animals were near. Her sharp eyes had spotted the rancher the moment he entered the river. She did not rush to act immediately. Instead, she observed him, noting every movement, every misstep. There was a calmness in her stance, a patience that came from years of experience. The rancher struggled, splashing the water around him. His strong arms fought against the current, but the river was stronger than he expected. He felt a sense of helplessness that he rarely experienced. He had spent his life managing cattle, repairing fences, and surviving the harsh land. He was a man used to being in control, yet here, in the water, he realized he was not in control at all. The river held him and he could do little but fight to stay upright. The woman on the bank did not speak. Her eyes stayed on him, calm and unwavering. She understood that the river required respect, not force. She could see the panic in his movements, the tension in his shoulders, the way he tried to command the water like it would obey. Her experience had taught her that fear often made people act hastily, sometimes making danger worse. She waited, letting him tire himself out a little, her mind already planning how she would help him safely. The rancher's breath came in heavy gasps, and he realized the current was stronger than he thought. He wished he had paid more attention to the river before stepping in. His pride made him hesitate to call out for help, but there was no one nearby who could hear him. He was alone, or so he thought, But the woman remained, a quiet presence that he could not yet see. For the first time that morning, the rancher felt a strange mix of fear and awe. He had faced storms, broken fences, and stampeding cattle, but water had humbled him in a way nothing else could. It was clear, it was alive, and it had no need for him to survive. He realized that he had underestimated it. The Apache woman took a step closer, her movements slow and careful. She knew the river well and could predict its hidden dips and rocks. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, as if she were part of the land itself. Her eyes never left the rancher. She did not speak, but there was something commanding in her gaze, a silent communication that told him to remain calm and trust the process. The rancher continued to struggle, but began to notice her presence. At first, he thought she might be another traveler passing through. But there was something in the way she watched him, the way her eyes stayed steady even as he flailed. It was not fear, nor judgment. It was focus, understanding, and readiness. He had never encountered such a look before, and for a moment it made him pause. The sun continued to beat down, but the water offered relief. The rancher's body was tired, but he felt a spark of hope. Someone was here, someone who could help him, someone who seemed to understand the river in a way he never could. He realized that help did not always come with noise or words. Sometimes, it came with quiet patience and steady eyes that told you exactly what to do without saying a thing. The woman stepped a little closer to the water's edge, careful not to startle him. Her presence was both calming and commanding. She had faced rivers like this before, ones that could twist and turn unexpectedly. She had guided others across dangerous waters without ever needing to shout or grab them. Her skills were quiet, yet powerful. The rancher, exhausted and humbled, felt that he was at the mercy of forces far greater than himself, both the river and the woman who had learned its ways. Time seemed to slow as they faced each other across the water. The rancher, realizing he could not fight the current alone, stopped struggling for a moment. He took a deep breath and allowed himself to be still. The woman's eyes never wavered, holding his gaze in a way that was both challenging and reassuring. In that moment, he felt a strange connection to her, a silent understanding that human strength alone was not enough. Respect, patience, and knowledge mattered more here. Though the rancher did not yet know her name, he understood that she was someone who had spent her life reading the land, understanding its moods and rhythms. He had spent his life managing the land in one way, but she had mastered a different kind of wisdom, one that could not be bought, only learned through years of observation and experience. He felt a mixture of awe and humility, emotions he rarely experienced in his daily life. The river continued to flow, gentle in some parts, swift in others. The rancher's body had begun to tire, his muscles aching from the effort of standing against the current. He realized that he was powerless alone, but the woman's calm presence reminded him that he was not truly alone. The river had revealed a lesson he had never learned in the fields or barns. Sometimes, human strength was not enough, and humility and trust were necessary for survival. The Apache woman stayed where she was, her eyes still fixed on him. She did not rush, but she had already assessed the situation, planning the safest way to help him. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, filled with knowledge and confidence. She understood that fear could make him act recklessly, so she waited, letting him find a moment of calm before taking the next step. The rancher, feeling both exhausted and strangely reassured, stopped fighting against the current. He let the water move him slightly, trusting in a way that the woman on the bank would guide him. He did not yet know how she would help, but her presence was a reminder that he was not as alone as he thought. The river had humbled him, but it had also brought him to someone who could teach him a new kind of strength. As the sun climbed higher, the scene remained quiet except for the gentle rush of water. Two figures, one struggling, one calm and observant, faced each other across the river. The rancher's pride had been humbled, and he felt a deep respect for both the land and the woman who understood it so well. And though he did not yet know what the next moments would bring, he felt a sense of anticipation, a sense that this encounter would change him in ways he could not yet imagine. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest as he struggled against the river's sudden pull. He had thought he knew the land, thought he could handle anything it threw at him, but now the water reminded him how small and powerless he truly was. Each step felt heavier than the last. The riverbed was uneven, and hidden rocks scraped at his boots and legs, making him stumble again and again. He tried to grip the edge of the riverbank, but the current pushed him backward. Panic started to creep into his mind, and with it came a rising sense of fear he rarely felt. The Apache woman had moved a few steps closer, her bare feet silent on the damp soil. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that rushing or raising her voice in moments of danger often caused more harm than good. Her eyes, sharp and steady, never left the rancher. She could see everything: the tension in his shoulders, the way his arms flailed, the way he instinctively tried to plant his feet against the pull of the river. It was clear he was strong, but strength alone could not save him here. The river required patience, careful movement, and understanding. The rancher gasped, realizing he had underestimated the current. For a moment, he tried to fight it with brute force, planting his legs deeper into the riverbed and pushing against the flow. But the water was relentless. It slipped around his legs, pulling at him like invisible hands. He tried to step backward, but his foot caught on a hidden rock, and he lost his balance again. Water rushed past his chest, cold and powerful, and he felt himself being dragged a few inches downstream. Panic gripped him, but he forced himself to take a deep breath. He had to think clearly. Yelling for help was useless. There was no one nearby. Even if someone heard him, the river was not kind to those who entered unprepared. He realized he needed guidance, someone who understood the water better than he did. That was when he noticed her, a figure moving quietly along the bank, calm and unshakable. The Apache woman had been watching him for some time, waiting for the right moment. She did not hurry. She had seen many people struggle against the river and knew that hasty movements could make the situation worse. The rancher felt a mixture of relief and hesitation. Relief because help had arrived without his asking. Hesitation because he did not know this woman, did not know her intentions. But there was something in her eyes that commanded trust. They were steady and unblinking, yet not harsh or judgmental. They carried a quiet authority, a knowledge of the land and water that could not be learned overnight. He realized that this was someone who understood the river far better than he ever could. Slowly, carefully, the woman stepped into the shallow edge of the river. She did not rush, and each movement was deliberate. Her balance was perfect, her feet finding solid ground where the rancher only found slippery rocks. She extended a hand slightly, not toward him yet, but as if signaling a plan. Her calmness began to influence him. He realized that struggling recklessly would only make the current stronger. He took a deep breath, trying to match her patience. The water continued to push and pull at him. He felt frustrated, embarrassed even. A man used to commanding his ranch, controlling the cattle, managing every part of his property, now found himself powerless in a simple river. The realization stung. Pride, he thought, can be a dangerous companion. It had made him careless, confident that he could handle the water without thinking, without preparation. Now, he had no choice but to follow someone else's lead. The woman paused a few feet away from him. Her eyes met his, and she nodded ever so slightly. It was a gesture full of meaning. She wanted him to remain calm, to stop fighting the current with force. She wanted him to trust her guidance. It was not an order, not a command, just an understanding between two people in a moment of crisis. The rancher nodded in return, almost reluctantly, but he knew it was the only choice. Carefully, she moved closer, entering the water until she was just beside him. Her movements were smooth, almost effortless. The river, which had seemed so menacing a moment ago, now became something manageable with the right approach. She reached out her hand again, and this time the rancher saw that it was steady and strong. He took it, gripping it tightly. Her fingers were firm but not rough, and the warmth of her hand contrasted with the coldness of the water. "Don't fight it," she said softly, her voice barely above the sound of the river. "Move with me, step by step." The rancher nodded again, feeling a strange mix of humility and hope. He followed her movements, stepping carefully where she directed, letting the current move him instead of resisting it. For the first time, he understood what she meant. The river was not an enemy to fight. It was a force to respect and work with. Every step became easier as he allowed himself to trust her guidance. The woman led him slowly toward the shallower part of the river, her eyes constantly on him, reading his movements, making tiny adjustments to keep them both safe. Rocks that could trip him were avoided, deeper patches were skirted, and the current, though still strong, became less threatening as they moved together. The rancher felt a new sense of admiration for her. She was not rushing, not panicking, and yet she had complete control of the situation. Her strength was quiet, but it was undeniable. As they moved, the rancher began to notice the details around him. The sunlight danced on the water's surface, making it sparkle like tiny diamonds. Birds called from the trees above, and the scent of wet earth mixed with the fresh smell of the river. Normally, he would have been too focused on work or survival to notice such beauty. But now, with his life quite literally in someone else's hands, he saw it all. He felt small, yes, but also part of something larger, something alive and interconnected. The woman spoke again, softly giving directions. "Step here. Lean slightly to the left. Good. Keep moving." Her voice was calm, almost like a song that guided him through the chaos of the river. Each instruction was precise, and he followed without question. There was no room for error, and yet there was no panic. The rancher began to realize that her calmness was a kind of power, one that came from understanding rather than forcing, from patience rather than brute strength. Moments passed that felt like hours, yet the woman's guidance never wavered. Slowly, the rancher felt himself moving closer to the riverbank, to safety. The current was still strong, but he no longer felt powerless. He had a guide, someone who understood the river, someone whose eyes never left him, someone who had turned what could have been a disaster into a manageable situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the woman led him to a shallow area near the edge of the river. He could plant his feet firmly on solid ground, and the water no longer threatened to sweep him away. He let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the tension drain from his body. He looked at her, finally taking in her features, strong, calm, and unwavering. Her gaze met his, and there was no judgment in it, only a quiet understanding. "You're safe now," she said softly. "The river can be dangerous, but respect it, and it can guide you as well." The rancher nodded, words failing him. He felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and something else he could not quite name. A deep respect, perhaps, for someone who had mastered both the land and herself. He realized that he had spent his life thinking that strength and control were the keys to survival, but this moment taught him otherwise. Sometimes, wisdom, patience, and understanding were far more powerful than brute force. They both stepped fully onto the bank. The rancher's boots sank slightly into the soft soil, and he looked back at the river. It had been an adversary just moments ago, but now it felt alive, almost respectful, as if it had allowed him to pass under careful guidance. The woman remained calm, her eyes still on him, not in judgment but in quiet attention, as if ensuring he truly understood the lesson the river had taught. For the first time that day, the rancher felt truly humbled. He had been strong, yes, but the river had shown him his limits. And in that moment, a stranger, an Apache woman whose life was intertwined with the land, had shown him how knowledge, patience, and calm could overcome even the most overwhelming forces. He realized he would never forget this day, Never forget the quiet power in her eyes or the lesson that strength alone was never enough. The rancher's legs trembled as he stepped onto the firmer ground at the riverbank, but even as he gained a foothold, he knew he was not completely safe yet. The river was still close, and the current continued to rush past with a quiet, relentless energy. His heart still pounded in his chest, a reminder of how powerless he had been moments ago. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, trying to calm himself, but the cold water clinging to his clothes made shivers run down his spine. The Apache woman remained in the water waist-deep, her stance steady and confident. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes calm yet piercing, as if measuring his courage and patience. "It's not over yet," she said softly. "You must come fully out slowly, one step at a time." The rancher swallowed hard. His pride wanted to protest, to say he could manage, but the memory of the current dragging at his legs reminded him otherwise. He nodded, forcing himself to focus. He knew that trying to rush out without guidance could mean another tumble into the river. He took a deep breath, listening to the rhythm of the water and the steady tone of her voice. The woman moved closer, not recklessly, but deliberately. Each step she took seemed almost choreographed, balancing the unpredictability of the river with the precision of experience. "Reach for my hand," she instructed. "Trust me. Move slowly. Don't fight the water." The rancher extended his hand toward hers, gripping it tightly. The warmth of her hand was reassuring, and the firmness of her grip gave him confidence. He realized in that moment that he was not alone. He had someone guiding him, someone who had faced challenges like this countless times before. He let the current move him slightly, following her lead instead of resisting it. Step by step, they began to move together. She shifted her weight to counter the flow, using her knowledge of the riverbed to find solid ground. He tried to mimic her movements, careful not to lift his feet too quickly or push too hard against the water. The rhythm of their steps was slow and steady, like a silent dance between human and nature. Despite his careful movements, the rancher felt the pull of the water growing stronger in certain areas. Rocks hidden beneath the surface made him stumble, and the current tugged at his legs with increasing force. Fear crept in again, but this time it was tempered by the calm presence of the woman beside him. "Lean slightly forward," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Step over that rock. Keep moving." He followed her instructions, and slowly, painfully, he felt himself getting closer to the edge of the river. Every step was a battle, but he was no longer struggling blindly. He was learning, absorbing her guidance, and realizing that survival was not only about strength, it was about patience, observation, and trust. The woman paused for a moment, steadying herself against the current. "Good," she said. "Almost there. One more stretch." Her voice was encouraging, yet it carried the weight of experience. She had guided many through the river before, but each person was different. Some panicked, some resisted, but this rancher was learning to listen. That made the difference. The rancher's arms ached from holding her hand, and his legs were sore from resisting the current even slightly. But he kept going. He knew that stopping now could be dangerous. The woman's eyes never left him, and each time he felt doubt rising, he found strength in her gaze. There was a quiet determination there, a reminder that the river could be conquered not by fighting it, but by respecting it and moving carefully with it. Suddenly, the current shifted beneath him. A deeper channel, hidden from view, tugged harder at his leg. He stumbled, slipping, and for a brief second panic surged through him. He felt himself tilting sideways, the water pressing against his chest, and for a moment it seemed like he might fall back into the river entirely. The woman reacted instantly. With a steady hand and precise movements, she adjusted her position, anchoring herself against the current and pulling him towards solid ground. Her grip was unyielding, yet gentle, and he felt himself being guided upward and forward. "Hold on. You can do this," she said calmly, almost like she had predicted this moment before it happened. The rancher's heart raced, but he forced himself to trust her completely. He let the current move him slightly, allowing her to guide him rather than resisting. Inch by inch, they moved forward, and he could feel the river becoming shallower beneath his feet. Each step felt like a victory, yet he remained cautious, knowing that one misstep could undo all the progress they had made. As they reached a safer part of the river, where the water barely reached his knees, the rancher felt a surge of relief. The fear that had gripped him moments ago began to fade, replaced by a growing admiration for the woman beside him. She had saved him not with force or strength, but with knowledge, patience, and careful timing. He realized that true power often came in quiet ways, not loud or obvious gestures. The woman smiled faintly, a gesture that conveyed both reassurance and pride. "See," she said softly, "the river is strong, but you are stronger when you work with it, not against it." The rancher nodded, still catching his breath. He could not speak for a few moments, overwhelmed by the experience and the realization of how close he had come to danger. His pride, usually so unshakable, had been humbled, and yet he felt a deep gratitude toward this stranger, whose calm and steady guidance had made all the difference. They continued to move together, now in the shallowest part of the river, stepping carefully toward the bank. The rancher's movements were slower, more deliberate, but more confident than before. He had learned something in the last few minutes that could not be taught by words alone. He had learned the importance of trust, observation, and humility in the face of nature's power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the river. Solid ground was under the rancher's feet, and the water no longer threatened to sweep him away. He stood there, soaked and exhausted but safe. The relief he felt was profound, a mix of physical comfort and emotional release. He turned to look at the woman who had remained calm throughout, her eyes steady and reassuring. "You are safe now," she said again, her voice gentle but firm. "The river is dangerous if you do not respect it, but it can also teach you." The rancher felt a wave of gratitude. He wanted to speak, to thank her properly, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he nodded, letting his eyes meet hers. In that silent exchange, he felt a deep connection, a recognition of her skill and experience, and an understanding of the lesson he had just learned. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the river and the surrounding land. The water sparkled, peaceful now, as if nothing had happened. The rancher took a moment to breathe, to let the calmness of the river soak into him. He realized that he had been given a gift, not just safety, but a glimpse into a world where patience, knowledge, and respect for nature were more powerful than strength or pride. The woman stepped fully onto the riverbank, finally free of the current. She looked at him once more, her gaze steady and composed. "Remember," she said, "nature always teaches those who listen. You cannot control everything, but you can learn." The rancher felt the weight of her words. He had spent years believing that strength and determination could overcome any challenge, but the river had shown him otherwise. He realized that humility was not weakness, but wisdom. He had been powerless in the water, yes, but through that powerlessness, he had gained understanding. For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, watching the river flow. The sound of the water, the smell of the wet earth, and the warmth of the sun created a sense of peace that the rancher had not felt in years. He knew that this encounter would stay with him for the rest of his life, not just as a memory of danger, but as a lesson in patience, trust, and respect for forces greater than himself. As they prepared to leave the riverbank, the rancher looked at her one last time. He still did not know her name, but he knew he would never forget her eyes, steady, observant, full of quiet strength. He realized that some lessons were best learned through experience, and some teachers came into our lives unexpectedly, showing us truths we could not see on our own. The river continued to flow, gentle and unrelenting, and the rancher knew he had been changed. He had been humbled, guided, and taught by someone who understood the land and the water in ways he never could. And though he had faced many challenges in his life, he knew that this moment, this turning point, would remain one of the most profound he had ever experienced. The rancher sat on the soft riverbank, his boots half buried in the damp soil, as the cool water lapped gently against his legs. He was finally safe, fully out of the rushing current, yet his body still trembled from the adrenaline and exertion of the last tense minutes. He breathed deeply, trying to calm his racing heart, but the memory of the river pulling at him was still vivid, almost like a shadow that lingered on his mind. Every muscle in his body ached, yet he felt a strange clarity, as if the danger he had faced had stripped away the usual distractions of life on the ranch. The Apache woman stood a few feet away, her gaze still on him, steady and unwavering. She had guided him through the river, had taken control of a situation that could have ended in disaster, and yet she did not gloat or celebrate. Her presence was calm, quiet, and commanding all at once. The rancher realized in that moment how rare it was to encounter someone who carried strength in silence, someone whose power came not from loudness or force, but from experience, understanding, and composure. He looked at her, trying to put his feelings into words, but nothing came. How could he explain the mix of relief, awe, and humility that washed over him? He had faced storms on the ranch, wild animals, broken fences, and injuries, but nothing had humbled him like this river. And nothing had impressed upon him so deeply the quiet power of someone who knew the land, its ways, and its dangers as she did. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice rough from exhaustion. I don't know what I would have done without you." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but she did not break her composed demeanor. "You survived because you allowed yourself to listen and trust," she said. "The river does not spare the careless or the stubborn. Today, you were neither careless nor stubborn." The rancher felt a wave of humility. Her words were not just about what had happened in the river, they were about him, about his approach to life and work. He had always prided himself on self-reliance, on being strong enough to handle any problem. Yet here, in the face of a simple river, he had been powerless. And yet, he had learned something invaluable. Sometimes strength alone was not enough, and trust, patience, and respect were far more important than brute force. As he sat there, the rancher noticed details he had missed in his initial panic. The sunlight reflected off the water, scattering tiny points of gold across the river's surface. A pair of dragonflies hovered above the reeds, their delicate wings catching the light. Birds sang from the trees, their calls sharp and clear in the stillness of the afternoon. The smell of wet earth and river water filled his nose, and he realized he had almost forgotten the beauty around him in his struggle to survive. The woman moved closer, her footsteps careful and precise on the damp soil. She knelt slightly to adjust a branch that had fallen into the shallow water, her movements practical yet elegant. "The river teaches us lessons if we pay attention," she said. "It is not just a path of danger. It is a guide, a mirror, a teacher. Respect it and it will respect you." The rancher nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. He had entered the river thinking it was merely water to cool him, a way to rest and refresh himself. But he realized now that it was so much more. It was a force of nature that demanded awareness, patience, and humility. He had treated it casually, as he often treated challenges on the ranch, and almost paid the price for it. And yet he had survived, guided by someone who understood it deeply, someone whose eyes had never wavered from his struggle. For a long moment they sat in silence, watching the river flow. The rancher's mind wandered, replaying the moments when the current had threatened to drag him under. He remembered the first steps into the deeper water, the slip over a hidden rock, the panic that had surged through him. And he remembered her, calm and composed, always ready, always aware. Without her guidance, he would not have made it to the safety of the riverbank. He realized that survival was not only about physical strength. It was about awareness, observation, patience, and understanding. The woman had all of these qualities in abundance. She had turned what could have been disaster into safety, not through force, but through knowledge and calm action. And he had been lucky enough to learn from her, to witness her skill, and to follow her guidance. The rancher stood slowly, feeling the aches in his muscles. He dusted himself off, careful not to stumble back into the shallow water. He looked at her again, seeing her not just as a guide, but as a teacher, a reminder of what could be accomplished with experience, patience, and respect for the forces around us. "Who are you?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. "I don't even know your name." The woman smiled faintly. "Names are not always important," she said. "What matters is what we do, what we learn, and how we carry it forward. Remember the river and let it guide you as it guided you today." The rancher felt a mixture of admiration and humility. He had faced many challenges in his life, but none had taught him such a clear and profound lesson. He had learned to respect the power of nature, to trust those who understand it, and to accept guidance without letting pride interfere. He realized that this experience would change him, not just as a rancher but as a person. He looked around the riverbank, seeing the land with new eyes. Every rock, every ripple in the water, every tree seemed alive with meaning. He noticed the subtle patterns in the current, the way the river flowed around obstacles, and he understood now why she had been able to guide him so successfully. She had read the river like a book, understanding its every twist and turn, its hidden dangers and safe paths. The woman stood quietly, watching him, giving him space to absorb the lessons he had just learned. She had acted decisively when needed, yet had allowed him to participate in his own rescue, guiding rather than controlling. There was a balance in her actions that fascinated him, a quiet wisdom that commanded respect without demanding it. For the rancher, the lesson was clear. There are forces in life more powerful than human strength. Sometimes the strongest person is not the one who fights, but the one who observes, understands, and acts wisely. The woman had embodied this truth, and he had witnessed it firsthand. He began to speak, but words felt insufficient. I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You saved me," she shook her head gently. "You saved yourself in part," she said. "I only guided you. The river does not give second chances lightly. You paid attention. You learned. That is what matters." The rancher nodded, realizing the depth of her words. He had thought he was helpless, but in truth, he had made choices, followed instructions, and adapted. The woman had provided guidance, yes, but he had also contributed by listening, observing, and moving carefully. Survival was never a solo act. It was a collaboration between knowledge, patience, and action. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the river. The rancher felt a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The tension of the river, the fear and adrenaline, had given way to understanding and gratitude. He looked at her one last time, feeling a quiet respect that words could not capture. "You've changed my view of things today," he said softly. "Not just about the river, but about life." She nodded, her eyes steady and knowing. "Remember what you learned. Respect what is stronger than you. Listen when guidance is offered. And never forget that patience and awareness can be more powerful than force." The rancher rose fully to his feet, feeling both exhausted and enlightened. He realized that this day would stay with him forever. He had faced danger, been humbled, and survived, not because of strength alone, but because of guidance, trust, and understanding. And he had learned something about himself as well. That true wisdom often comes from those who see the world differently, those who respect the forces around them, and those who act calmly when others panic. As he began walking back toward his ranch, leaving the river behind, he felt a shift within himself. He would never again underestimate the power of nature, nor would he forget the lessons learned from a quiet, observant, and strong Apache woman who had kept her eyes on him when he needed guidance most. He knew that the memory of her presence, her calmness, and her wisdom would remain with him, shaping his actions, decisions, and respect for life for years to come. The rancher walked slowly away from the river, his boots leaving soft imprints in the damp soil. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape, and the warm light painted the world in shades of gold and amber. Each step he took felt different than usual. The weight of the day's events pressed on him, not a heavy, burdening weight, but one that made him feel alive, aware, and deeply reflective. He glanced back at the river one last time. Its water sparkled, flowing steadily as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew that the calm surface belied its strength and potential danger. He had underestimated it and almost paid the price. And yet, he had also learned something far greater than mere survival. He had learned the value of patience, trust, and guidance, lessons that would shape him far beyond the events of that afternoon. The Apache woman had already begun moving along the riverbank, her silhouette barely noticeable against the trees and rocks. She had guided him through the most dangerous moments, and now she was returning to her journey, quiet and unobtrusive, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The rancher felt a pang of regret that he would not know her name, that he could not properly thank her beyond words. But deep down, he understood that this encounter was not about recognition or gratitude. It was about lessons, growth, and the understanding of forces greater than himself. As he walked, memories of the day played through his mind like a slow-moving river. The moment he first stepped into the water, the feeling of helplessness, the cold shock against his skin, the panic that had gripped him, it all seemed vivid and raw. And yet, intertwined with those memories were the moments of guidance, her steady voice, her firm hand, her unwavering eyes. Each moment had taught him something important, not just about survival in the river, but about life itself. The rancher's mind wandered further. He thought about the years he had spent managing the ranch, overseeing cattle, repairing fences, and battling the unforgiving land. He had faced challenges, yes, but he realized that he had often approached them with force, with stubbornness, believing that strength and willpower could solve anything. Today had taught him differently. He had learned that humility, patience, and awareness were sometimes more powerful than force. He had learned that guidance, when accepted, could lead to outcomes far better than relying solely on oneself. By the time he reached the edge of his property, the sun was low on the horizon, and the sky glowed in soft hues of orange, pink, and purple. The rancher paused to look at the land he had tended for so many years. Everything seemed different now. The hills, the fields, the river winding through the property, they were alive with meaning, more than just land to work and own. He felt a deep connection to the earth, a respect that he had not fully appreciated before. The river had shown him that life, like nature, was unpredictable and powerful, and that it deserved attention, care, and humility. The rancher's thoughts turned again to the Apache woman. He had watched her act with quiet authority, guiding him with calm and precision, never imposing, never rushing, yet always in control. He realized that she had embodied qualities he had long admired but rarely practiced: patience, observation, understanding, and silent strength. He knew he would carry the memory of her eyes, steady and unwavering, as a guide in his own life. As night began to fall, the rancher returned to the barn, where the scent of hay and earth greeted him. He tended to the cattle, checking fences and doing small chores, but his mind was still with the river. Every movement felt slower, more deliberate, as if he were more aware of his surroundings and the consequences of his actions. He reflected on how close he had come to danger, and how much he had learned from someone who had stepped into his life for a brief, transformative moment. In the quiet of the evening, he finally allowed himself to feel gratitude, not just for being alive, but for the lesson itself. The day had reminded him that life was unpredictable, that forces beyond his control could test him at any moment, and that the right guidance could make all the difference. He realized that pride, though natural, could sometimes blind a person to wisdom and experience that might save them. Humility, he now understood, was not weakness but a form of strength. The next morning, as he walked toward the river again, not to swim but to observe, he felt a sense of peace. The water was calm, reflecting the early sunlight, and he approached it with respect rather than casualness. He remembered the way the Apache woman had guided him, teaching him silently through her actions and her presence. He thought about the lessons of patience, observation, and trust, and he knew they would shape how he approached challenges in the future. Over the following days, the rancher found himself noticing things he had overlooked before. He observed the flow of water through the fields, the patterns of the wind in the trees, and the subtle changes in the land with a new awareness. He realized that these small observations, often ignored in the rush of daily work, could teach lessons far beyond what brute strength could achieve. The encounter at the river had opened his eyes to a world where attention, patience, and understanding mattered more than force or pride. He also found himself reflecting on human connection. The Apache woman had entered his life briefly, yet the impact of her presence was profound. He had learned that people could teach lessons not just through words, but through action, observation, and example. He had learned to respect knowledge and experience, even when it came from someone outside his familiar world. And he had learned that guidance, when accepted with trust, could turn potential disaster into safety, chaos into calm, and fear into understanding. Weeks passed, and the rancher returned to his routines but with a changed perspective. He approached his work with a deeper awareness, listening more closely to the land, observing more carefully, and acting with patience. He found that challenges that had once frustrated him now became opportunities to practice the lessons he had learned. The river incident remained vivid in his memory, a reminder that life was full of forces beyond control, and that humility, trust, and observation were essential tools for navigating them. One day, he walked along the river again and paused to watch its steady flow. The water sparkled in the sunlight, calm and yet powerful, and he felt a deep respect for its strength. He remembered the moment of panic, the cold shock of the water, and the guidance that had saved him. He thought of her eyes, unwavering and calm, and he realized that he had been given a gift, a lesson that would last a lifetime. The rancher returned to his home, carrying with him more than just memories. He carried the wisdom of the river, the lessons of patience and trust, and the understanding that strength alone was not enough to navigate life's challenges. He had learned to respect forces greater than himself and to value guidance from those who understood the world differently. In time, he shared these lessons with others on the ranch, young workers, neighbors, and family. He told them about the importance of observation, patience, humility, and respect for nature. He did not boast of his experience, nor did he speak of the woman by name. Instead, he focused on the lessons themselves, the values he had learned through a brief encounter that had changed his life. The river continued to flow as it always had, carrying water, life, and wisdom through the land. The rancher knew he would return to it often, not to test his strength, but to reflect, observe, and remember the lessons of that day. He knew that life, like the river, was unpredictable and powerful, and that survival and growth required more than force. They required attention, patience, and trust. Years later, when he looked back on that moment, he remembered the fear, the struggle, the cold shock of the water, and the unwavering gaze of the Apache woman. He remembered the lesson of humility, the importance of guidance, and the quiet power of knowledge and patience. And he knew that the river, and the woman who had guided him, had given him something far more valuable than survival. They had given him a new way to see and live in the world. The rancher continued to work the land he loved, tending to his cattle and maintaining his fences, but he carried with him a deeper awareness. He noticed the subtle signs in the wind, the movement of the water, and the behavior of the animals. He approached challenges with patience rather than force, with observation rather than assumptions. And though the Apache woman had long since moved on, her lesson remained with him, guiding him silently in every decision, every action, and every encounter with the unpredictable forces of life. The river, he realized, had not only tested him, it had taught him. It had shown him the importance of humility, the value of trust, and the power of observation. And through the guidance of the quiet, steady presence that had watched over him that day, he had learned to approach life with respect, patience, and a willingness to listen. He often thought of her eyes, calm and unwavering, and he knew that their impact would never fade. The lesson of the river had become part of him, shaping the way he lived, worked, and thought. And though the encounter had been brief, its influence was profound, a reminder that life's greatest teachers often appear unexpectedly, guiding us through challenges and leaving us changed forever. The rancher walked along the river one final time, feeling the cool breeze on his face and the warm sunlight on his back. He smiled quietly to himself, knowing that he was not the same man who had entered the water weeks ago. He had been humbled, guided, and transformed. And in that transformation, he had discovered something invaluable: the quiet power of wisdom, patience, and respect for the world around him.